I need help. I don't know what. I'm so impossible. I don't even know what slot to put the CD in.
It's my pleasure to introduce Ann Powers, one of the leading rock and pop music critics in the English language. She is a senior curator of Experience Music Project in Seattle. She's been a pop critic at the New York Times, The Village Voice, and many other publications. She's co-editor of Rock She Wrote, Women Write About Rock, Pop, and Rap, author of Weird Like Us, My Bohemian America, and co-author of the forthcoming book with Tori Amos, Piece by Piece, A Portrait of the Artist. Ann Powers.
Okay, I have several things to say before I begin. First of all, thanks to Chip and McGill University for creating the single most nervous moment of my entire life, except for when my daughter was born, which you'll hear a little bit about in this paper. Also, I started writing about blue, and I wrote 4,000 words. So we're going to get through some of it, but I don't know about all. I couldn't stop. And thirdly, I've decided that papers are boring unless you have music playing with them while you're giving the paper. So unless it's Greg Tate giving the paper, then it's never boring. But so I'm going to play some of Blue while I talk, and if I fumble, forgive me. And it's not going to be too loud, right? Yeah. Travelin'. When I was a young girl, I didn't know that blue was supposed to be sad. Yes, the songs dealt with heartache, the staff of life, I thought, when I was 23. I hurt you too, and we both get so blue, Joni sang in her opening salvo, her voice crawling up into the corner of the ceiling, just as my heart would on so many awkward mornings after during those years. Yet there was a tickle in her high note, a tease. She communicated what every young lover felt, the fragile frisson that can come on when the heart goes low. I am on a lonely road and I am traveling. What other kind of road would a young bohemian woman, intoxicated by her own imagined uniqueness and the freedom it seemed to offer, ever want to join? Since Blue's release in 1971, the album has become the other thing its title almost implies, a blueprint for singer-songwriters embarking upon self-expression, a thumbprint, too, impossible to truly imitate, but forever pressing into the palms of the artists who have followed in Joni Mitchell's path. While her peers like Laura Nyro and Joan Baez remain either obscure or locked into their moment in history, women artists especially, seem to feel they must acknowledge Mitchell or be forever condemned to comparisons that leave them wanting in her wake. Sarah McLachlan, Tori Amos, Alanis Morissette, and countless lesser-known strivers never fail to mention Mitchell. The folk artist Lucy Kaplansky once declared on stage that Mitchell was the single biggest influence on her life. Diana Krall, a relative latecomer to the Joni cult, told an interviewer in 2001 that she listened to A Case of You every single night. Roseanne Cash has said that Mitchell gave her permission to practice her art, and the list goes on. If Joni is the number one goddess attended to by pop's female oracles, all oracles are female, I think, Blue is the revelation most consulted. Appropriately, its illuminations come in cryptic script. Some artists and critics prefer other works. For example, Prince and Morrissey both have said they love The Hissing of Summer Lawns the most. But Blue is mentioned most in songs and on desert island disc lists. It's Blue that, more than 30 years after its release, still poses the foremost challenge to pretenders. This is partly because of timing. Released just as second-wave feminism emerged, Blue fit into the emerging literature of women finding their own voices, forming a canon, or connecting to a canon that extends from Virginia Woolf to Alice Walker and beyond. Mitchell unintentionally placed herself in this category in an interview. Okay, here, this is the thing. Maybe unintentionally placed herself in this category in an interview explaining the album's origins. Her songwriting, she said her songwriting was a form of self-therapy following the failure of a certified therapist to comprehend her position. Quote, I went to see him, the shrink, and started to rap from the time I came in the door, which turned out to be 40 minutes of everything I thought was bothering me, which included a description of myself as a person who never spoke, which naturally he found hard to understand. It's not surprising that Mr. Shrink was confounded by this statement from an artist with two highly confessional albums already under her belt. But in fact, Joni Mitchell, to my mind, is stating a problem she faced, and that all women trying to find a means of self-expression have faced in a public and even private arena where the feminine position has barely been acknowledged as anything but receptive and reactive. Blue, it turns out, is not merely a work by and about a woman speaking. It is music about silence, avoidance, the fantasies and necessary lies that have allowed women to keep traveling. Despite the gains of the past half-century, the main trouble Blue expresses, the near impossibility of a woman to claim a central or solid identity for herself and still remain free, still seemingly can't be avoided. And so this voice, restless, joyous, tragic, strong, and never settled, still demands our prime attention. Paper. When Blue was released, the women of America had begun to seek their particular place within the countercultural revolt. This was the start of the era in which nascent feminists were being shouted down at SDS meetings, were making gowns of raw meat to wear at protests against the Miss America contest, founding woman-centric bookstores, farms, and consciousness-raising groups. Joni Mitchell would have none of this. It's the norm for women in popular music to resist the scarlet F for feminism, but Mitchell has always been, by her own statements, more one of the guys than most, collaborating mostly with men, engaging and generally resisting metaphorical sisterhood as either a base or even a valuable element in her art. Yet her fans, commentators, and the artists who have followed her still come up with terms like, quote-unquote, reticent feminist, that's from a Time piece from '74, to describe what inevitably feels like work that serves a profoundly female experience. Even critics, sometimes troubled by her surface self-absorption, saw its value in that moment of women emerging. Quote, in a male performer, such intense self-concern would be an egotistic cop-out, wrote Robert Christgau in 1972. In a woman, it is an act of defiance. In that same review of For the Roses, Christgau described what Mitchell offers listeners as an exciting, scary glimpse of a woman in a man's world. This from a man, of course, normally not privileged to that perspective, even though a lot of male rock critics think they are. For those of us still maneuvering that not exactly enemy territory, the man's world. And affirmative action aside, this still includes many female pop musicians as well as other professionals and creatives. The view is an internal one. Joni takes us there inside, in code. Her vocal inflections, rhythms, and arrangements create a classic state of double consciousness in which the subject witnesses her own containment but moves in and out of it like a captive in a complex with no visible bars. Consider the song My Old Man. On one level, a romantic paean to free love. On another, a classic blues that even uses the phrase, the frying pan's too wide, like Bessie Smith or something, to describe Mitchell's old lady loneliness. But the real condition here is as flimsy as the paper these hippie lovers declare they don't need. Against a piano bed that invokes Sunday hymns and good girls' lessons, Mitchell charts one of her challenging vocal melodies, a line that goes far too high to maintain. We don't need a piece of paper, she sings, her voice near breaking. Who believes her? Does she? Would that paper cover her, as in the children's game of paper, scissors, rock? Or would it free her, be her ticket to something more stable than this song evokes? At the song's end, Mitchell hammers out a solid, soulful chord progression, as if to claim her place with those blues women who lived with the ambiguities of another time. As if perhaps to use history as a means to banish doubt. But the question remains, in the memory of her singing, the sound of consciousness as it always really is, raised or not, always in flux. Pretending. Asked a few years ago in a radio interview to describe what Joni Mitchell brought to pop songwriting, the critic Tom Moon said, she figured out how to tell stories without telling the whole story. This is the poet's art, but it's also often the ingenious act of ordinary women forced by convention to conceal their true emotions or even their most profound experiences. It's impossible, in light of the revelation 7 years ago that Mitchell had entrusted a daughter to adoption when she was 21 years old, to hear the song Little Green as anything but a relic of that arduous moment and an outline of the story Mitchell must have told herself in order to survive that moment, the story of her child's happy ending. Give her a name she can answer to. I'm gonna cry. I'm an adoptive mother, so this is really emotional for me. She sings, encoding the one she's chosen. I know you're sitting there too.
Go on.
How can anyone turn a circumstance so wrenchingly personal into something others can share? Joni Mitchell hid her meaning in plain sight. Rolling Stone's reviewer of Blue, Timothy Krause, said that this song passeth all understanding. It must have struck Mitchell, who'd been singing the song live for years, before recording it, as almost funny that she could so deliberately share her deepest secret and no one would grasp it. That fact speaks to the suffocating veils that have surrounded modern adoption, to the tenacious stereotypes that surround the identity of mother, and to the shallow range we really give to biography and art, preferring to argue over sexual gossip. Is Blue about Graham Nash, James Taylor, David Blue, instead of considering what other experiences might feed a song? But Little Green's elusiveness is also connected to its paradoxical straightforwardness. Joni Mitchell gave the song one of her simplest melodies, kept it within comfortable vocal range, and accompanied herself sparingly on acoustic guitar. No tricks, no crazy rhythms. In the song's presence, the listener relaxes and dreams herself a narrative she needs. Lori Moore describes such a moment in her novel, Who Will Run the Frog Hospital? Joni Mitchell was keening Little Green on Sill's record player. Sill's the character in the novel. Sill's listened to that song all the time now, like some woeful soundtrack. The soprano slides and oohs of the song also always made us both sing along. When I was there, Little Green, be a gypsy dancer. 20 years later at a cocktail party, I would watch an entire room full of women, one by one and in bunches, begin to sing this song when it came on over the sound system. They quit conversations, touched people's arms, turned toward the corner stereo, and sang in a show of memory and surprise. All the women knew the words, every last one of them, and it shocked the men. Don't fool yourself, listeners, if you ever think that you don't use artists for your own selfish purposes. Get out your key. Are we on to Carrie now? Please come. But oh, those crazy rhythms. Mitchell loves them and believes the stories they tell of intoxicating possibility and drunken disclosure. In Carrie, she is a pirate Jenny, seduced by the bad boys, but always ready to steal away with their keys in her pocket. For the longest time, I actually thought the talisman Mitchell asked her lover to produce in this song was a key, not a cane. I cherished that fairy tale image of a red, red rogue offering entrance into a magical realm where princesses hike up their gowns and dance. Mitchell began writing many of the songs on Blue in Greece, on a dulcimer she picked up at the Big Sur Folk Festival the year before she went on her European sojourn. She didn't know how to properly play it and soon developed an ersatz style based on rhythmic slapping, as if this most fey of folk instruments were a bongo drum. When she finally bought, quote, an old apple crate of a guitar, also in Greece, she noticed that her approach to guitar had changed. I began slapping it because I'd been slapping this dulcimer, she later said. Her impropriety offered its own kind of entry into a wider world than either the folk tradition or the LA folk rock scene, Mitchell's roots, could offer. In the island story of Carrie, we can see the beginnings of Mitchell's later travels into world music and jazz. Did Mitchell need a man or various men to unlock the wider landscape her art was beginning to embrace? In Carrie, the lyrics tell a story paralleled in the music of a woman perhaps using a man, definitely loving him, but knowing she has to break away. Executed in one of Mitchell's famous unconventional tunings, which she named Madala tuning after her favorite island in Crete, Carrie is a loosey-goosey dance between Mitchell and her band, particularly, now if I get this wrong, forgive me, Stephen Stills on guitar, a frequent collaborator who often pushed her toward her rock and roll edge. Her dulcimer dodges and parries as she gives rein to the internal argument that the song's lyrics enact. Her own voice offers playful backing vocals that push her in one direction, resolving each phrase, while the music pulls her out and into the next one. The feeling of the track is most of all fun. The blue here is the sea's reflection in a glass of wine. It's the sonic equivalent of Dorothy Parker making a comeback to Robert Benchley. Bohemian women have to know how to spar and to laugh as they grab the best entries and exits they can find. Shell. Blue's title track seems almost like a footnote to the album, subdued and yet deliberately ethereal. It advances no narrative, apparently, and no compelling rhythm. It's like a breather, but a heavy one. The song also contains one of the easiest Mitchell lines to make fun of. Here is a shell for you, she warbles. There's no other way to describe it, and patchouli wafts through the air, stinking up the atmosphere that Carrie just danced clean. Yet think of the line in another light. The shell to which Mitchell refers is certainly her song. a spare and echoing thing within which the listeners might find their own meanings, but could it also be herself? It is difficult for all singer-songwriters to transcend the limitations of biography. Not only do most write from their own experience, the fact of pop performance, in which the artist becomes essentially an actor playing himself, reinforces gossip's interpretations. Mitchell, with her famous lovers and intimate writerly and musical voice, has been more prone than most to apparent self-disclosure. Yet she is just as adept at wearing masks as the artist who may be her closest peer in rock, Bob Dylan. It's just that this self-portraitist's mask often resembles her own face. Can you see yourself in their contours? Sunset Pig. The songs on Blue incorporate both autobiography and poetic abstraction within a design that countless songwriters have tried to emulate. But they also arose within a historical moment. California at the turn of the 70s was a crucible for American popular culture, the site of its flightiest dreams and most embarrassing excesses. Joni Mitchell made Los Angeles her home for personal and artistic reasons, but in the bargain she gained a persona that has sometimes seemed more trouble than it's worth. Rock's old lady, she was famously called, a sun-kissed icon of L.A. Her devotees never stopped hearing the inflections of Saskatoon plains on her lips, but for many observers, and in her own suggestion at times, she was of the canyon, where the feminist mystique was a mystical, commodified dream. Feminine mystique was a mystical, commodified dream. Yet, if Mitchell can be seen as a counterpart to Bob Dylan, as I mentioned before, Los Angeles was her New York, and gender has everything to do with this. The mythologies that fascinate her elevate and unravel beauty, sensuality, and romance, just as Dylan did with patrilineal legacies, justice, and historical upheaval. The connections aren't as obvious as the ones between Dylan and Woody Guthrie or Jack Kerouac, but in Mitchell's songs of the Blue period, I hear the noirish tinge of Raymond Chandler, the exquisite pathos of Douglas Sirk's movies, the swashbuckling of David Lean, and of course, the scene-stopping cool of a writer I think is very connected to her, Joan Didion. Mitchell is a Los Angeles artist beyond her friendships with Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and that's something in which she can take pride. As for folk rock, that bastard term, albums like Blue justify its existence. It's not that Mitchell or her doppelganger in this category, Neil Young, were turning songs of the people into auteur projects. They were seeking the horizon line between a personal vision and a shared one, which all artists do, of course, but not always with such intention. Within this project, this time, California is a ballad of the open road, and it opens up to us. I'm totally lost now. Okay. Crazy Bird. Joni Mitchell, did I get there? Joni Mitchell is sure a fast talker. As quick with her tongue as her lyrics describe her being on her feet. While silence and secrets might be the cost of the feminine position, talkativeness is a common trait of the untrammeled female spirit, from Jane Austen's gossipy heroines to Joyce's Molly Bloom. Mitchell's vocal lines can be very hard to master. At the all-star tribute to her that was staged in New York in the late 90s, I witnessed artists of such caliber as Katie Lang, Sir Elton John, struggle, stumble, and bow as they tried to interpret Mitchell's hits. In a song like This Flight Tonight, invoking a common emotional combination for Mitchell, a sense of liberation tinged by slightly panicky regret, the tumble of words creates irresistible locomotion, a sense that this is life and you can't get off. Mitchell may have never developed this brilliant logorrhea if she hadn't taken up the guitar and then rejected the proper way to play it. Masters like Pat Metheny and Prince routinely list Mitchell as one of their favorite players, yet she hasn't spawned a school or even many singular disciples. Ani DeFranco, to my ears, is maybe one of the main ones who currently emulates Joni Mitchell in her guitar playing style. Though many women strummed in the 1960s, the way Mitchell approached the instrument had something of the impact of women novelists picking up the pen during the rise of that genre. In this tool, she found a natural conduit for her internal life, and what a surprise that was to those who thought they owned it. Why so few women artists have recognized the potential for feminine discourse in following Mitchell's style remains a mystery to me. Too many piano lessons for the young girls of the world, I suspect. Now I get to cry again. Baby. Though I said before that as a neophyte fan, I never knew that Blue was supposed to be sad, I always recognized the grief in River. And we're not on River because I don't know how to work the CD player. Ah. It must be one of the most bereft musical pieces ever recorded. The falling apart Christmas carol that begins it, the drifting cadence of its verses, the unresolved melodic line of its refrain. I can't get there. Help. Did I miss it? Sorry. This is what sorrow sounds like, way beyond Desolation Row. And for me, even more than the more explicit, though more emotionally elusive Little Green, this is the sound of a birth mother mourning the loss of her child. It's hard to know how to talk about the story of Mitchell's decades-long loss of her daughter, now come back to her in reunion, as the adoption jargon calls it. It's especially hard for me as an adoptive mother who, in the new fashion of openness, knows and is continuing to be involved with the birth mother of my daughter. I've seen the anguish this decision brings to a woman who, as Mitchell wrote in a later lyric, can bear a child but cannot raise her. I've experienced fears of my own, wondering how, given the shared gift of my child, I can ever live up to the love that her birth mother showed in choosing the life she chose for her. All I know is that I hear River differently now. The tributary Mitchell imagines, the one that could take her away from her pain and save her from unbearable aspects of herself, is art, and music specifically. But music always contains sorrow, the sense that its pleasures soon fade. This song, originally meant to be the title of the album that bears it, tells the story of how art fails us even as it offers as potent a salve as art ever can. In some ways, my gift for music and writing was born out of tragedy, really, and loss, Joni Mitchell recently told Robert Hilburn of the LA Times. When my daughter returned to me, the gift kind of went with it. The songwriting was almost like something I did while I was waiting for my daughter to come back. This is an astounding statement, and in many ways, I hope it's not true. The music lover in me wants Mitchell to recognize the joy she's given herself as well as so many of us through her music. The adoptive mother winces at the wound this birth mother has sustained. Yet whether this is a life's truth for Mitchell or simply another intense declaration of the moment, it reveals a larger truth. Music is so often sad because it seems expansive enough, beyond written or spoken language, to fill the areas in our hearts that life has blown empty. But it never really can. Okay, I'm totally lost in the music, so I'm just gonna keep reading. So bitter and so sweet. And what about sex? Surely the Joni Mitchell of the Blue period was known for it, with so many famous paramours, and a beauty countless others longed to taste. White women pop stars of the counterculture were a prim lot, let's face it, despite free love, but Mitchell always found a place for libidinal excitement in her music. When she sings, "I want to shampoo ya" in All I Want, it's not only funny, it's hot, and partly because of the trilly, frilly way she turns the phrase. She begins the sadder, slightly wiser case of you with a joke, too, deflating her lover's statement of fidelity with the observation that the constant guiding star he claims to be is constantly in the dark. The lyrics continue to offer a lament, mostly, but that title line comes on just like foreplay, making the blood rise. I could drink a case of you, Mitchell sings, jumping an octave and still be on my feet. In the struggle between freedom and regret, sensuality and realism, the zing wins out here. The sexiness of Blue is rooted in Mitchell's ongoing search for that zing, even in her darkest moments of self-reflection and remorse. Singing opens us up. It's physically gratifying, even, maybe especially, when we're howling the blues. Every song on Blue provides that moment of release somewhere, to different degrees of abandon. Real sexiness in music as in life resists categories. It comes on unexpectedly, offering its risky gift. Not how to live a politically correct autonomous life, but a deeply fun autonomous life. But the contradiction Sanders implies is false. Fun in politics, like sex in politics, intertwine in every woman's life, every person's life. Dark cafes. So Joni Mitchell departs, or asks the listener to leave her for now, in the flickering light of contradictions as she ponders her next move. It's striking how, after so long, Blue retains its freshness. Young women still play out its stories of yeses and nos, highs and lows, mistakes and new resolutions. In some ways, we've made so little progress. But as always with Mitchell, we can consider this blueprint from another angle and realize that her songs open up to whatever level of psychic freedom a listener can manage, and whatever complexity of contradiction she can absorb. Mitchell herself moved on to much more musically and lyrically too, but the devilish guardian angel she left in that dark cafe is one that guides us still. Thank you.
I'm kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing. Thank you so much, everybody, for appreciating it and the beauty of your emotionality in this situation, and I mean, I'm kind of speechless. What can I say in response to all of this?
I'm not the first person to cry while Blue was playing.
Gee, speechless. That's weird.
I could put that on my resume. I made Joni Mitchell speechless. Well, you've made me speechless many times, so thank you.
It's so fascinating to see, how music goes into 3 different lives and is understood or felt or it strikes in different ways and then comes out as a personal expression again in also different ways. I just put together a Starbucks album and which is artist choice, and I never really thought much about because it was just coming out of me, and you're making a record and you're moving on. I didn't look back, or think or analyze really where it was coming from. You just kept going and kept going. But in the process of putting this thing together, I called out initially the names of about 20 songs that, off the top of my head, that had stopped me in my tracks, in my life, starting with, classical music as an infant and moving on through. And some of it didn't hold up, it was something that I liked when I was a teenager. So I kind of whittled it down and put it in a fluid form so that I can take this trip of things that inspired me at any time, And some of the things that inspired me, like Positively 4th Street, I had to leave off because I just don't want to go there all the time, like, you got a lot of nerve, but I love it, And Lenny, I couldn't get Lenny on it either. Like I tried, like Suzanne, and I tried a couple of things, but the interesting thing was it's like Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington, and I got Jeep's Blues on there, and especially certain kind of horn compositions, it's nearly all black, It really, Edith Piaf and Debussy, there are, so this is an interesting time for me because I've kind of quit music. A few weeks ago I hated it. In doing the Starbucks record, I've come to find out, no, I don't hate it at all. As a matter of fact, I love it so deeply that I'm kind of, a hurt lover or something. But I started listening again to a lot of things, and now, like, I'm going to get a better sound system and do a lot of listening. I can actually listen to music again for pleasure. So it's almost like starting back at square one. I'm listening with the keenness that I did before I began to make music. Because once you get absorbed in the process of it, you listen less, and you're also, you probably should be, you're becoming more and more narrow of necessity to concentrate on what you're going to make, and from everything that you've absorbed. And it takes a long time for what you've absorbed to come out. Like I started as a folk singer with no intention of being a musician at the Alberta College of Art, playing to get money to smoke, really, That was about the extent of it, and folk music was easy. In 6 months I was a professional. I could make $15 a night. But the music that I loved was very far away from what I was making. I didn't think I could ever make music like that. The idea of playing with Miles's band, was just, I never thought that by absorbing that eventually that it would not be imitative, but it would come out in such a way that Wayne and Herbie could participate, It took me a long time, 6 records. That's why I resembled a folk musician, I think, to get a band that could play to my music. They just kind of polka dot along on the bottom, and you're right. I had a black sense of feel, And so, you know, it would, you'd lose the elasticity when I put the drums and things, so I'd end up going bare, which made me then resemble a folk singer longer. And when I finally did get a band that could play my music, it was a jazz band, and everybody was kind of shocked. And then you went into a minority camp, and eventually I lost my airplay. Working with Mingus was, yeah, I never got played on the radio again after that, sure. But that was a necessary part of my education. I'd do it again in
the turning point then would have been Court and Spark when you worked with Tom Scott in the LA Express.
That was kind of the pinnacle of you know, after that, it was time to kill me as far as the industry was concerned, you know, so it was like, you know, so the work became more and more experimental. They're going to kill you anyway, so, you know, I just stretched out.
We have time for some questions if people want to step up to this mic for any of the panelists.
I'm sitting here carrying my blue Bible.
You have my CD cover. No.
Yeah, I have your CD cover. Since I was 17, we're talking about over 30 years ago, I've admired Miss Mitchell's work. It was a voice that I didn't have when I was a young kid going through a New York-infested drug world, and carried me through to now be a children's singer for the last 20 years. And I'm very impressed, I don't know how old you are, but I'm very impressed with the fact that blue means that much to you. Because I know that even though I've gotten older over the years, I still relate to every song as if I was 17, even though I've been through so many more experiences. So how did you come to it in your life? And
I think I checked it out of the library along with Neil Young's Decade when I was like in 7th grade. You know, I don't know, it's always been in my life. I feel like a lot of people I know, artists I know, songwriters I know, and generally people, it's just one of those foundational texts, kind of, like one of those albums you have if you're a music person. Okay. But of course there's so much more to what Joni does that I hate to limit it to that one. But, and then just working with a lot of women artists, especially over the years, which happens to be what I've done, it is always coming up. I mean, we have a exhibit on songwriting up in the museum that I work in, and we asked the songwriters to give us things that meant a lot to them, and one of them, Rosie Thomas, who's the Seattle songwriter, she gave us the cassette cover of her copy that she gotten when she was like in 7th grade. So it just is always there. It's like, I don't know, the Bible.
People talk kind of in amazement that music holds up, but if music is made standing on the foundation of what you truly love, and this is very hard to do in pop music because they stick a producer on you. I never had a producer, and you know, I thought produce is for vegetables. You know, it's like I mean, you know, you spritz produce. You know, but you don't. If you're working, yeah, and quickly, if you're sincere and you're working from your true roots, which people aren't doing in this generation. They're working in a commercial window. They're making money music. They're making look at me music, and they're appealing to demographics. So to hear you talk, like to be surprised, like that somebody would like some like that old stuff or something. It shouldn't. That's miseducation, and the people have been trained to think of music as disposable, and like everything else in America, you know, that act from the 60s, or that act from the 70s, or are you still listening to that old stuff or something? I think we really need to be re-educated. You know, if we don't, they talk about the lack of music education in the schools, but look at what the music that the generation that had music in the schools made. It's like they must have all gotten A's. Oh, you're good. You know, like Mingus said of Ornette Coleman, when he was a baby, his mama must have said he put his A block next to his W book, and she went, "Oh, baby, that's fantastic." You know, he put his T next to his H. "Oh, baby, that's fantastic." You know, so his thing was, if you praise somebody too much about everything they do, then they think everything they do is great, right? Yeah. So you got music being made now that isn't that good. You know? But even young kids are starting to discern that, and the business is kind of in a state of collapse.
I think,
So-
yeah, I also think, you know, we would wonder why someone, I'm 40 by the way, so someone like me or even younger, say Rosie Thomas who's like 24 would have discovered Blue, but we don't ask why do people read, you know, Robinson Crusoe or you know, whatever, something even James Joyce said, which is so much. In music, I agree, and I, as a lifetime music journalist, I have to say that music journalism has been part of this, along with the rest of the industry, not necessarily, like novelty sells, and we always have to talk about the new thing, and we haven't been great about keeping our history alive, so that's one of the reasons why we're here today. I wonder, I'm curious about, John, your feelings about Blue, and you know, we had a wonderful experience of listening to your rendition of River and your changing of that, and what that album might have meant to you personally.
Oh, gee. I was a kid in the cultural wasteland called Jersey City, New Jersey, and my older sisters had these albums, and it was my first exposure to soliloquy, wanderlust, the world, you know, a certain kind of lyricism, like Rainy Night House has a classical cast to it with the piano, and I was like, that's so beautiful. And I just got these songs into my bones, you know. I mean, you know, I talked to a friend of mine the other night, he was like, oh, if you see her, tell her that she saw me through my adolescence. I was like, well, I'm sure she hears that all the time. But I said, no, wait a minute, that's a really amazing thing, because that's such a raw time in a person's life. And music can be such a powerful out, and that album was definitely an out for me when I was in Jersey City.
Yeah. As you told me a few years ago that a fan had said to you that before there was Prozac, there was the album Blue.
It was three girls in a bar.
I wanted to say how interesting I found each of your testimonies on what the music meant to you. And I got to tell you that as a Montrealer living in Quebec for my whole life, I never imagined really the effect of Joni Mitchell's music on blacks or in the States, or even and what you had to say. And I think each of us has our own understanding, and it fit into each of our experience. Mm-hmm. And probably I'm not the only one. I mean, I have my own multidisciplinary dreams about Joni's music, Robert Lepage plays, colors, and I guess I just want to say that as in Montreal in '72, and with everything that was going on politically and emotionally, that it had a way of reflecting so much of our lives too. And so much of what you had to say really was, I could really identify with.
I won't talk for too long, but it's probably the only opportunity I'll ever get in my life to say thanks to somebody that brought me up. and
We have to say, Joni, this guy's been expressing his love for you all day. This is your biggest fan right here.
Well, the thing is that I'm not a great talker. I'm going to paraphrase Joni Mitchell. I'll say I'm just a lonely musician. I live in a Fender case. You know, that's about it. And I spent a lot of time in a basement with a record player and an instrument, listening to arguing going on in the upstairs, you know. And my family is a musical family, so when we talked about music, wars would break out. I mean, it was like religion or something, you know. Like my dad was a jazz musician, and you know, anything else was, you know, I would listen to Joni, I would listen to Jimmy, and I would listen to Miles. And of course my friends weren't interested in Miles, but I kept the pop and folk on one side, and I kept the jazz on the other side, and when finally Joni joined with Jacko, and for me it was like a marriage made in heaven. And it just like confirms what I was saying this morning, was that I feel that when you make true art, You transcend all boundaries. You break down the dualities. You touch, for one moment, an oasis of truth in a world of BS. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's something that you desperately need. And if she's going through a catharsis through her music, then she's bringing us with her, and she's succeeding. And everything else, anybody else that comes along and says, well, I think she's speaking for this cause or that cause, I think that, it's like I said, great art creates all kinds of great spin-offs for the whole human race. It heals people. But we're not going to get healed much with what's going on now.
I think it's an important point that great art does transcend boundaries. So we don't say that Picasso was a great Cubist painter. We say Picasso was a great painter. We don't say he was a great Spanish painter. He was a great painter. And the great art can transcend boundaries of genre and gender and time. And that's why blue sounds timeless. And in fact, I would say the entire Joni Mitchell catalog does.
And I just want to say, I was jokingly think of this in my head as the identity panel. You know, you have an African American person, you have a queer performer, you have a woman. It's like PC jackpot. But the thing is that it's very. I can barely think of another artist that you could have a panel where all of those identity positions were served so powerfully. I think. I don't know, because like Dylan, John Kelly's view on Dylan, I don't even want to know. But so I think that is a remarkable thing about the person we're talking about today, is that she is so fluid in her identity in a way.
We'll take your question here.
Thanks. You mentioned the whole Scarlet F thing for feminism, and I really think you're right in the sense of a lot of female artists, even today, are reluctant to associate themselves with feminism. And I was wondering if there is an explanation for that, or if it is somehow about a kind of perceived tension between like feminism and sexuality, and what you think young female artists might be able to do to kind of change that.
Thanks for asking that question. I think part of it has to do with every artist resisting categories. Like every time I've been working with a lot of artists at the museum where I work to talk about their process, and it's hard for many artists to talk about their process because it's something they feel might be damaged by putting too much of a box around it. That's one thing. Secondly, I really think it has to do with the circumstances in which the music industry operates. Women are still largely objectified, even maybe more so, as Joni was implying before. There have not historically been that many women who were acknowledged as virtuoso musicians or engineers or studio heads. Like so many of the roles, power positions in the music, in rock and roll, supposedly liberating rock and roll, are still totally oriented around men. And so most women I have talked to about this feel they have to mute their gender, at least, maybe not in, like maybe it comes out in their songs, but if you're in the studio making a record with like 5 guys and you have a male head of your record label, and you have, and the only person around you who's a woman besides you is your publicist and your stylist, you're going to be a little nervous about identifying too strongly as what too many people perceived as, a hairy-legged feminist or something like that. That said, I think, I'm always happy when women do embrace the F word, and I was glad in this project I've worked on with Tori Amos that she says in her preface, I was born a feminist, and I appreciate that. I feel I was born a feminist too.